which is something I manage. That's my non-academic job, and I cannot show you the security operations center because it's a restricted area. But I do have this background image which shows what I'm looking at. This background image is a blurred image so that none of the cameras and the sensitive technologies are shown, but just to give you a sense of what I'm looking at over the camera there. And I mention this because we are an active operations center. It's now 2:30 Texas time, and there may be some background noise as my personnel move around and deal with any incidents and so forth. So just so you know that I am not watching television. If there's any background noise, that's what it is. It's an active 24/7 operations center. So I've got a lot to tell you about Ukraine and UK, and I'll try to fit in as much as I can. I may not be able to do that, but I do want to give it 30 minutes. Randy, you can correct me if I'm wrong. 30 minutes of presentation and then 30 minutes of questions. Was that the schedule?
You know what? We can go 40. We can go 40 and 20.
Okay.
Whatever you need.
Yeah, well, I'll try to do it in 30. I try to squeeze a lot in. I may talk very fast, but in questions, if I skip over anything, we didn't understand anything, you want me to go back to anything, use the time in questions and I'll happily go back. So I want to give you an overview of the United Kingdom role in Ukraine security, and why the United Kingdom has a leading role. It certainly has the leading European role, and I would second it only to the United States, and only in certain circumstances. So you'll see that the United Kingdom has led the United States on Ukrainian security. That doesn't mean that it hasn't made some mistakes here, and there are nuances, there are downsides to and criticisms of how the West has handled Ukrainian security. Not, so obvious ones that we can all agree with is it's expensive to protect Ukraine, and there are lots of inefficiencies in doing that. But having said that, there is a lot of virtue in Britain's leading role in Ukraine. So I want to give you some of the causes of that, and then some parameters of how the United Kingdom is involved in Ukraine. So here's a starting slide to show you NATO's lineup essentially against Russia. And I say lineup, NATO was formed to confront the Soviet Union. In the 1990s, Russia was a partner for peace. And then from about 2014, we've slipped into a second Cold War, essentially, with the new Russia. And increasingly, just year on year, that confrontation becomes colder. And you may have seen reports, leaks from foreign governments just this month, where foreign governments, Estonian, German, Poland, and Britain, their intelligence services are leaking estimates that they expect war. So I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm not saying I agree with that, but I'm just saying that this is how risky, that the risk is at least salient, and maybe that gives some evidence that it is increasing. So let's move ahead to 2014, because NATO sort of effectively launched or recognized, let's say NATO effectively recognized a second Cold War in 2014. So up to that time, after the mid-1990s, NATO had, to remind you, had refocused on out-of-area operations, like in North Africa, North African security, and particularly Middle East. And it had operations to stabilize in the Balkans, and then it was going all the way to Iraq to help stabilize the post-2003 invasion Iraq. So the Iraq, I've said that wrong, post-2003 Iraq. And then missions are going all the way out to Asia to partner with Asian regional security organizations. So NATO wanted to go global and get involved in global security, and it wanted to deny that it was in confrontation with Russia. Well, all that ended in 2014, and that's largely due to Putin. and his first invasion of Ukraine, but other things. Violations of airspace and sea spaces and even land space in the case of Sweden by Russian forces, and general bad actor behavior. So 2014, there's a NATO summit. It's in Wales in the United Kingdom, and Britain was pushing for more confrontation with Russia and to reorient NATO back to its founding mission, which is to confront Russia, or at least to contain Russia. Now, Britain led that summit, and it was one of the 4 countries to agree to lead new battle groups. And the battle group that Britain leads is in Estonia, which is the most exposed of the Baltic states. So in that sense, Britain was taking the riskiest mission. So it leads a multinational battle group, which has expanded greatly since then. So there are tanks there. There are tanks actually exercising there now. And, then you're talking about heavy brigade groups, and that's very expensive to sustain and then to exercise with. So the investment has increased. And that's true for all the countries involved here, including the United States, which leads the battle group in Poland. So Britain made that commitment to defend Estonia, which is the most exposed of the Baltic states, and there was therefore, in that sense, is taking more of the risk than the other NATO members. Now that's the Baltic area, which is not necessarily impacting on Ukraine's security, but Britain at the same time was committing to Black Sea security, let's call it that. So the states, the current, as of 2014, the current members of NATO in the Balkans, Black Sea area, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. Greece and Turkey don't get along, so neither of them is going to lead a mission in that area because they're going to object to each other. Romania and Bulgaria don't have the capacity, so Britain takes the lead in guaranteeing the airspace of Romania and Bulgaria, because it's at this time that Russian aircraft, particularly, but also sea vessels, are violating national sovereignty. Both British, not just British, but most member states, including all the way through Alaska to United States sovereignty. So Britain led an air defense mission in Romania, as well as Estonia, since 2017, and that is still ongoing. Now, it wasn't just airspaces, it was also the Black Sea itself, so the surface sea security, so surface naval, or at least surface warfare security / security. So this was particularly pertinent for Ukraine. So Ukraine's military losses were more naval than Air Force and Army, and it had tiny Air Force and Army at the time of the 2014 invasion anyway. It was just under resources, and there were reasons such as corruption, political indecision. But of the forces it had, its greatest losses were naval, and that was simply because Russia occupied Crimea, where these Ukrainian vessels were based. So in 2015, Britain started a training mission and when we say training mission, it's capacity building mission. So they are training sailors, but they're also working on interoperability, and they're managing liaisons from other member states of NATO. So there's a lot going on in these training missions. So training mission is somewhat of a misleading title. So there's a lot going on. Then in 2017, the United Kingdom started leading an annual naval exercise in the Black Sea, which is known as Sea Breeze. And by the time of 2019, you're talking about that Sea Breeze exercise is pretty substantial. So dozens of warships and aircraft. And just as an aside, I don't have a slide on this, but at that time, 2019 was a pertinent Sea Breeze because Russia was accusing Britain of using it as cover for spying and for intimidating Russian vessels and things like that, and violating Russian sovereignty and stuff like that. So So that was a big one, 2019. Then 2020, the British Defence Secretary, who was Ben Wallace, I think that was Ben Wallace back then. I'm sorry, just give me a minute. Calm. Are we clear? Yeah, thank you. Sorry, just had to check on something. I apologize. Right, so 2020, essentially that mission was renewed. And it's a risky mission. I mean, Black Sea it's a small sea, and there's a lot of nations operating there, some of them covertly, including Russian submarines, for instance, which try to sneak through the Dardanelles. It's risky. There's all sorts of chances of collisions. Even before the war started in 2021, the second invasion of Ukraine started in 2021, there's risks of collisions and accidental hostilities. And now it's a war zone. So it's risky for Britain to take that on. And I'm building a theme here, which Britain was taking the lead. It's taking the lead, and I want you to think about why that should be. Why Britain? And but by the time I get some later slides, it probably will become obvious why Britain. But you think about it, geopolitical reasons and historical reasons for that. So Britain invested in air defense, naval defense before the second invasion of Ukraine. Now, Britain rhetorically at this time has a very strong policy commitment to Ukraine. So building up NATO, containing Russia, and Ukraine. So this is before the second invasion. So this is not retrospective saying, oh, we cared about Ukrainian security all the time. It was consistent through these years from 2014, since the first invasion. Britain was pushing for more NATO investment in security. So I've got a couple of quotes here which illustrate this. So a defense secretary under Theresa May, Gavin Williamson, so he falls out with Theresa May, mostly about Chinese threats, as it happens. Like you remember the scandal about Huawei. So Huawei was inside UK government networks. Williamson didn't like that, and Theresa May was essentially covering it up. Now, I've highlighted at the top there, one of the pretexts for saying we need to confront Russia, deter Russia, was non-compliance with the INF Treaty, so the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. And Russia was investing more weapons beyond what it was allowed to do by that treaty, and Britain objected to that. And then you can see we want to support our friends in Ukraine and the Balkans. Now, he falls out with Theresa May. Theresa May replaces him with Penny Mordaunt. She says the same thing. So there's this consistency. The British government was very fractious at this time. So they're still fighting about Brexit. Brexit had not been implemented at this time. And they're fighting about what foreign policy is going to look like in general and all that stuff. But the one thing all the parties could agree on is we need to confront Russia. We need to support Ukraine. And I'm still asking you, why Britain? Why is it so easy to get multi-party support on this issue in Britain and not in other states like Germany, for instance? Germany is still very indecisive and fractious about what its policy should be. So think about that. Now, in March of 2021, you get this overdue review of security and foreign policy, somewhat equivalent to a United States government quadrennial review. But this one, the British one, was delayed many years. So it was instigated by David Cameron. It goes through three prime ministers and many postponements before it actually gets delivered. So it gets delivered by Boris Johnson, but you shouldn't think of it as Boris Johnson's product, because it's really a product of three administrations. Now, this document, very long, very specific about its relationship with Russia and China, very confrontational by most Western government standards, including the United States. The United States government, by this time, you're now in the Biden administration, and Biden is much more amicable. His policy is much more amicable than Boris Johnson's. They're not friends, by the way, personally or in policy terms. So the document says we will actively deter and defend. Now think about that word actively. Actively deter and defend. That's risky, right? Because now you're going to you're going to put your forces in harm's way. You're going to send them to the Finnish border, the Estonian border. You're going to stop Russian aircraft violating North Sea sovereign spaces. You're going to stop them using the English Channel in reckless ways. So Russian vessels were using the English Channel in reckless ways and posing a hazard to commercial shipping. That was one of the objections at this time. So that was the policy position. Remember that phrase: actively deter and defend. And you can see a provocation, which I've highlighted second, the Salisbury attack. So if you remember, that was not the only instance, but it was the latest instance of Russian covert operatives killing people on British soil because they're dissidents. Or in this case, Russia tried to kill a dissident, but ended up killing a British citizen who picked up this was Novichok, and it was disguised in a perfume bottle, and she sprayed it on herself and she died. The dissident nearly died, and his daughter nearly died. The agent was sprayed on their door handles, home door handles, car door handles. They nearly died. The fatality was a British citizen. So Russia is conducting, what you'd consider in other circumstances terrorism, illegal assassinations on foreign soil, and killing British citizens. That's going to piss off foreign governments, not just British. It's going to piss, because there was a polonium assassination too before that, and that pissed off other governments because the polonium was traveling through their jurisdiction and contaminating their aircraft and trains and stuff. So it went through Germany, for instance. So Germany was pissed off. So it's not just Britain here that was at risk. And you can see again in this document the specification of Ukraine. We're going to confront Russia, but specifically we're going to, there's Ukraine. It's the first country Britain specifies as a foreign country it's going to include within its security capacity in the context of confronting Russia. So there you go again. There's this theme. We're getting to 2021, less than a year before the second invasion of Ukraine. So I'm just going to show you this quote, just to show you that the concern within British government continues, the concern about Ukraine. And there was this scenario that a lot of risks were combining at this time. So China was threatening Taiwan, Russia was threatening Ukraine by 2021, and the worry was that they were going to either partner or they were going to take advantage of each other's aggression. The British government was pushing this, and then other governments, including Germany, but the Biden administration, the United States, they're just they're treating this. This is the Boris Johnson administration. They're treating Johnson as a bit of a Trump character, like he's reckless and aggressive, and he's crying wolf and all this sort of thing. Well, Boris Johnson had his faults, but he was right. He was right about this. Now, so here's some more reasons for why Britain is getting more proactive, that's the right word, about confronting Russia. You get increased violations of its sovereignty. So warships, in this case, in 2020, is interesting timing. So this is happening a lot, every few months at minimum, at least frequent, every few months. But the timing here is March 2020. So Russia sent vessels into inside British territorial waters to spy on British signals. Why March 2020? Because Britain had surged its navy globally to help with COVID relief, and Britain's navy is under-resourced at the moment. It doesn't have all the warships it requires. So essentially, there were no warships left, and you get, apart from these little sort of coastal protection vessels that have to do the shadowing. And then you get, at the same time, these airspace violations. These old Soviet bombers, but they're packed with signals intelligence stuff. So they're sucking up all these signals, find out where British military headquarters are, and potentially also decrypting their signals. So this is an intelligence activity. Right. So then you get to November 2021. Russia's getting, well, Putin personally is getting more threatening towards Ukraine as we go through 2021. NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, he called on Russia to be transparent, to de-escalate, right? Conventional diplomatic language. Britain, again, this is Boris Johnson's administration, it releases this statement saying, we pledge unwavering support for Ukraine's territorial integrity. So I got a question for you. Can anybody think about where that language comes from? Any historians who could think that language is pretty much has previously been issued by a British government in a very consequential circumstance, which helps to explain why Britain is so concerned to lead. Okay, Randy, can you see any hands? No. It's okay.
I'm not, but
It's okay. So I'll tell you. So this is March. The language is from March 1939, and it's the end of March 1939 in reaction to the German occupation of the rest of Czechoslovakia. So there was sort of a first invasion. It's an interesting parallel. There's a first invasion of the Sudetenland by agreement with Britain under appeasement, under Neville Chamberlain. Chamberlain appeased and said, take the Sudetenland. So did France. And then Germany unilaterally breaks that agreement and occupies the rest of Czechoslovakia. So it's kind of second invasion, right? A bit like 2022 in Ukraine. And Britain, after that occupation of Czechoslovakia, says about Poland, essentially, we pledge unwavering support for Poland's territorial integrity. Now, this gives you the clue. Why is Britain leading? Because Britain is most anchored in the experience of appeasement. It has to atone for that, and it also has learned that lesson. You do not appease aggressors. So Britain gets to lead on this in Europe, not only because this is post-Brexit and it wants to be more proactive and show its worth to the world, and it's not only because it has an imperial past and it likes to be involved. It's not only because its public tends to be much more educated in foreign policy than other national publics. It's because of appeasement. It's anchored in that experience. Right, so then you get to February 2022. Britain starts taking a leading role in trying to what's the right word, to persuade Putin to climb down. This is not appeasement, right? Britain's setting its Secretary of Defense and its Foreign Secretary to Moscow at the same. Both of them are there in February 2022 to say we will confront you. Don't do this. We will punish you for this. You will regret this. And this is unilateral, because the United States government at this time is not supporting this mission. The United States government is saying, everybody get down, everybody climb down. We're not. The United States government isn't going to commit to doing anything if you do this. It was a period of indecision and ambiguity and retreat from the Biden administration, and the British government was not having that. It wanted to confront. So it was going there, saying Britain will not let you do this. Will not let you get away with this. But Britain was not being backed by a superpower in doing that. So Putin, it's like, whatever, go home. So it's pretty much says go home. And Putin refused to see these two visitors. They did have lower official meetings, but Putin himself refused to see them. So now you got a personal insult. So then you get to a few days later. So the 11th of February, United States and United Kingdom warn their citizens to leave Ukraine. Think of the order of that. The United States is saying, leave Ukraine, it's going to happen. The United Kingdom doesn't want to say that. It doesn't want to say, no, I'm not accepting it's going to happen. We want deterrence. And the United States is not backing Britain up on that. But when the United States says to its citizens, you need to leave, everybody has to say it, everybody, same day, right? It was that evening. United States says it's going to happen. On the 16th, Biden said it's going to happen. On the 11th, later on the 11th, Biden says the invasion is going to happen on the 16th, and Ukraine says, no, it's not, because one of the reasons being that Ukraine's economy collapses as soon as you say that. And, Zelensky's trying to protect the economy and get aid and all the rest of it. And then that next day, right, Ben Wallace, who's Secretary of Defense, administration, because the Biden administration did not back up the Johnson administration in trying to deter the invasion ever happening. Biden administration is essentially saying it's going to happen, and essentially Ben Wallace subtly is accusing Biden administration of appeasement. So again, there you got it. Munich, by the way, just to remind you, that's September 1938. That was where the agreement was signed by Neville Chamberlain and the French Premier and the German Premier and the Italian Premier to give the Sudetenland to Germany. Appeasement, the worst, the most obvious example of appeasement. So you do get invasion in February 2022. The forces are massed on there. Britain's response is immediate military response is to send troops to Poland to help protect Poland, because Poland shares this long border with Ukraine and was complaining they couldn't defend their border. They share a border with Belarus and Ukraine. Yeah, that's right. I said it right. Now, the timing is interesting. Again, Britain sends forces to Poland before the United States does. They're not coordinating on this. It's Britain leading the United States again. Other Western responses, right? There's this tit for tat where Boris Johnson is essentially escalating on Biden. So 22nd of February, Biden says we're going to impose sanctions on 2 Russian banks, and then later the same day, Johnson says, well, we're going to sanction 5 Russian banks and 3 oligarchs. And then the Biden administration said, well, we're going to sanction the same assets, entities. And that goes on for months, right? So the Biden puts its faith in economic sanctions. But if you remember, it spends months escalating, and it causes a strategy where it says, the longer you stay in Ukraine, the more we're going to ratchet up the economic sanctions. And that's militarily, that's the wrong way to do it, because if you're going to stop a war, you have to put all your sanctions on right away and shock that economy and try to stop the industrial part of the war and shock the diplomats and the politicians who are allowing it to continue. And that was Britain's approach, and it was not the Biden's administration's approach. Another good example of this, the same day, Biden describes Putin's actions as the beginning of an invasion. And Boris Johnson goes to the House of Commons and says, no, it's a renewed invasion. Come on, it's not a beginning of an invasion. It's actually the second invasion. It's already happened. Come on, So, like I said, they don't like each other. Everybody knows who is implicated. Who is implicated when Boris Johnson says these words? All right. So you got that diplomatic leading. So Britain is leading diplomatically, and not just the United States, but it's leading Europe on diplomatically. More confrontation, and then you got the military aid. Britain is leading in that too, not in scale eventually, but in precedent. So if you remember this too, there's months and even years of escalation in what sort of weapons we will supply Ukraine. Oh, we're not going to send tanks, and then we do send tanks, for instance. Britain led in the deployment of these fire and forget anti-tank missiles. So NLAWs, which is the next generation light anti-tank weapon, nice portable weapon, powerful enough because it has this shoot up and down trajectory. It can hit the top of tanks and easily penetrate the armor, the thin armor on the top. So Britain sends those first, and then the United States sends lots of weapons, including javelins, that is javelins are there in much greater scale than the NLAWs, and the United States government gets that credit. But it's the British who said we're going to send these. The United States government was not decided on sending that. Then you get to AFEs. So Germany, to its credit, wanted to send tracked vehicles. It was sending its BMP-1s, which were ex-Soviet vehicles, and it couldn't sell it on the market. Germany doesn't like to export military weapons, so it's got this huge stock of old East German BMP-1s. One way to get rid of them is to give them to Ukraine. Czech Republic is the first to send tanks. It sends T-72s, which are tanks that Ukraine was already familiar with. And then Britain sends a bunch of wheeled vehicles and Harpoon anti-ship missiles. And the wheeled vehicles, not so much of an escalation in aid. The anti-ship missiles are. Those Harpoons have been primarily responsible for sinking the Russian landing assault ships and logistical ships. It's been British Harpoons that have been doing that. So there's a neat quote here from David Petraeus that catches recognition of Britain's leading role here. So there's some things that Britain is leading on that we haven't mentioned yet. So Petraeus says in an interview, I want to give a little shout out to global Britain. By the way, that phrase global Britain is one that Boris Johnson's administration is using to describe its post-Brexit role. It's going to be global. So under Brexit, before Brexit, you were European Union, like European Union controlled foreign policy and most defense policy. So you couldn't be global because the European Union wouldn't, unless you check it with the European Union. So after Brexit, you can be global Britain again. UK was the first to get anti-tank guided missiles into Ukraine, first to sanction first to sanction Russia economically over Ukraine. It's imposed the most sanctions of any country. Remember, the United States eventually catches up with British sanctions, but the scale, the timing and the scale was all British. First with anti-ship missiles, those Harpoons, and then there's credit. It shows the agility that it can exercise now. It's global Britain, and it's acting outside of the European Union. So that's an important point. Britain has the flexibility that other European states do not have, because they have to wait for the European Union to act before they can. That's by treaty and convention and all the rest of it. It's not just normative. That's legal. The European Union controls foreign policy. Those members do not have the agility that Britain does. Britain can say, I'm going to supply these missiles, and it happens the next day. Right. The other aid escalation, which was a big one, was main battle tanks. So Poland takes the lead here. It says it's going to send some Leopard 2s, which are German supplied. So Germany has a export control on those tanks at the even over the end user, right? So Poland is the end user, but Germany sells these tanks with a veto on further export. So Poland says that, and it says Poland actually says, I'm going to send them whether Germany likes it or not. So it brings up the issue of main battle tanks, and Britain is the second country to say, yeah, we're going to send main battle tanks too, which is those Challenger 2s. So the second one down on the right, Challenger 2s. And it also is going to send AS-90s, which is a self-propelled 155mm howitzer, and hundreds of other vehicles, including tracked infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers. So after that, Germany confirms it's going to send 14 Leopard 2s too. That number comes from Poland. It's going to match Poland's commitment because it doesn't want to be seen as, an outlier. And it's after that that the Biden administration says, we're going to send some too. So that was actually a bilateral agreement. So Germany and the US were actually talking secretly. Are you going to send some? Are you going to send some? So that was a bilateral agreement. They're both going to send some. And then those main battle tanks get to Ukraine in March of last year. So we're coming up to almost a year ago. All right. How am I doing? Okay. So yeah, I'm doing pretty well, aren't I, for time? So this is where I'm going to leave it. This is the current situation. So we have this exercise Steadfast Defender, which is an annual event. When it started a few years ago, it had, I think it had 9,000 NATO troops in it. This year, it's 90,000. So it's 10 times the size in terms of troops. And it has almost all NATO members in it. And it has Sweden in it, which is a prospective member. It's going to become a member. It was waiting on Turkey's veto, if you remember. So huge exercise, largest since the Cold War. Here's the theme. Who's the biggest contributor? It's not the United States, it's Britain. Now, this is not directly relevant to Ukraine because it's happening all in the Scandinavian countries. The closest this exercise gets to Ukraine is the Polish border, the Romanian border. So that's where it is relevant to Ukrainian security. But as it happens, it's focused on what if Russia launches a second invasion, which could be Finland or Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Russia might think that if it goes for one of these small countries, the other member countries might say, "Ooh, I'm not quite ready for war yet. You can have that one." Right. So that's the fear. Anyway, you get the idea. Britain's still leading in NATO security generally, and then with implications for Ukraine. Okay.
Bruce, perfect. We've got about 40 people who've been tuned in, and we got about 20 minutes. So you guys go ahead and raise your hand electronically or whatever that. And I'm looking to see who I've got a couple of hands here. I just got to figure out who they are. Thank you. Giovanni, I'll let you go first, and Tyler, I'll let you go second.
Thank you, sir, for the presentation. It was very insightful to see what Britain's been doing and the global lead that they're taking, really, even from the U.S. My question is in the mid 2010s when Britain started ramping up these exercises in the Black Sea. I'm in the Marine Corps myself, and we controlled from 2010 to 2018 this operation which was the Black Sea Rotational Force, but that stopped during the Trump administration halfway through his tenure in 2018. Did that have a significant impact in the upping of Britain's role in the Black Sea because we didn't have that expeditionary capability and no longer really working bilaterally with Romania primarily?
Was a problem. So that's an insightful question. Thank you. It was a problem because Britain, like I said earlier, Britain's navy is currently under requirement. So its force structure is not meeting its requirements, and it's true in personnel as well as warships. And as it happens, one of the key gaps in British naval capability is landing assault ships and logistical ships. It has other problems like air defense, naval air defense. So it's a problem. And as you know, naval acquisitions is a long process. It's longer than for the other forces. So yes, it was a problem. Britain couldn't replace the US lift that was earmarked for those exercises once the Trump administration cut them. And all Britain could do was focus on the interoperability and the and more of the sort of basic skills. And as it happens, that speaks to the Ukrainian capacity to counter the Russian Navy from land. Well, yeah, that's true. I was going to say there is a naval capability. Ukraine's naval capability is now essentially unmanned vessels which drive explosives into a warship. That's pretty much the secondary capability Ukraine has for downing sinking Russian vessels. Before that, it was Harpoon missiles and their US equivalents, and they're launched from land. So those drones, naval drones, they're launched from land too. That's part of the explanation for why Ukraine is so good at that is because under British leadership, it had to develop these land-based capabilities for want of its own surface fleet, and also the lack of Britain's surface fleet to compensate for Ukraine's lack of a surface fleet. So it's had to rely on land-based missiles, which is another reason why Britain was quick to send Harpoon missiles.
Bruce,
thank you, sir.
Giovanni, thank you. Tyler and then Max.
Hi. First of all, thanks for speaking to us today. We all really appreciate it. But I guess my question kind of concerns what you think the future of British support will be, because the news just came out today that the British economy is in a recession. There's going to be an election, by the latest of early next year, and barring something happening, it seems the prediction is going to be that there's going to be a major labor victory. So I'm kind of curious what you think that might do to potentially distract Britain away from Ukraine, or if at all.
Yeah, great question. So I've got good news and bad news. Let me say, first of all, that yes, you can assume that the next government will be a Labour Party government. All the indicators point to that. The staleness of the Conservative Party, they've been in government since 2010. Staleness alone suggests they're going to lose. They've had 5, 6 prime ministers in that time. They're overdue for a loss. And then the Rishi Sunak administration hasn't done great. It's an indecisive government. So yes, you can assume the Labour government's there is going to be a Labour government, and the sort of question is how strong it's going to be. And I would say it's strong. I mean, people are debating whether it's going to be a landslide. It'll be a strong administration, so it can do what it wants, because it'll have that strong majority. The good news for Ukraine is that Labour government it's a new Labour government. It's not the old Jeremy Corbyn government, which was Marxist, sort of unadmittedly Marxist, but that was his unapologetic background, unsympathetic to the United States, unsympathetic to the Western alliance, while being sympathetic to Russia. Keir Starmer is not Jeremy Corbyn, and he's made very clear to be electable. He's been strong on saying this is a new Labour government. So the Labour government will not be an old style like 1930s Labour Party, which was pro-appeasement, anti-rearmament until the war started. And there is multi-party support for supporting Ukraine, and it gets back to the historical and geopolitical reasons for that. It's not a partisan issue to support Ukraine and to wish to contain Russia. It's not a partisan issue in Britain. It is in America, and there are peculiar reasons for that. Some of them legitimate, but there's multi-party support. The only parties that would be skeptical. So imagine that the Labour Party doesn't win an outright majority; it has to form a coalition. The parties that would contest current foreign policy would be the Scottish National Party, for instance. And maybe the Unionists in Northern Ireland, but they would get, even if they're in a coalition, they would get there'd be quid pro quos for them to adopt current foreign policy, like more investment in Scotland, Northern Ireland, whatever it takes. So I do not foresee any change in current policy. Now that's politics. The economics are a real problem. Like Britain's economy is not strong, so a recession is confirmed for the last quarter of last year, 2023. Britain doesn't seem to be in a recession, but it's had this long period of stagflation, unadmitted stagflation, borderline stagflation, whatever you want to call it. And its military is chronically underfunded. Its social welfare burden is just out of control. It's like two-thirds of government spending, depending on how you count it. If you start counting healthcare and elderly care or social care, you're pushing 75% of government spending. It's just unsustainable. And Britain is in debt too. It's heavily in debt, proportionally worse than the United States. So there was a period when was it? It was like 2022. British national debt surpassed its economy. So it's bigger than its economy for the first time ever. So Britain does have these chronic economic problems. Having said that, Britain still has plenty of advantages. It's still a highly industrialized, highly developed, highly educated society. It has a strong legacy armaments industry. There is consensus about British security, even though there's consensus on very little else. So in those senses, Britain has latent capacity if it can sort out its domestic politics. It has the latent capacity to maintain its global role. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Max, to you. Thank you, Tyler.
Hi, thank you for joining us. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. So I just wanted to get your reaction to what you thought about, or if you saw like the Tucker Carlson interview with Putin, and what you thought about Putin's responses to like his reasons for invading Ukraine, and even like the whole like being offered or asking to offer NATO to join NATO and then being rejected.
Yeah. So, as you probably saw yourself, and most people have picked up on this, Putin's statements are very historical, and more than that, they're ahistorical in the sense that he has this view of history which is not accurate. That Ukraine was always part of Russia, that Ukraine is the aggressor, and then by extension, NATO is the aggressor because it partnered with Ukraine. And there's genocide by Ukrainians with British help in eastern Ukraine. It's a very ahistorical, and other people have remarked on it that he being Putin, he is probably more focused on. He's always been focused on history to justify his policies, but he's more focused than ever because he's like overcompensating for the discreditation of his other reasons for invading Ukraine. So all he can say now is, well, Ukraine was always Russian, and the West has always hated Russia. And if you let the West, if you let NATO be strong, then they will invade Russia and all this sort of crap. I'm sympathetic to Russia's place in the world, but we have to say statements like that by Putin are just ridiculous. They just turn on its head his own culpability in all of this. So I think on balance, if you're asking me for an assessment of that interview's impact, the net impact is very negative for Putin because it confirms Putin's unreliability, right? If he can't get history right, and if he's going to reach for history to justify mal history, he's going to reach for that every time. If he's going to continue to reach for that, you just can't trust him. He's just not realistic. Maybe he's not rational. He's not persuadable. It's like he's starting to look like a Adolf Hitler from Britain's perspective at the end of March 1939. It took us long enough, but now we know we can't trust him. Does that answer it for you?
Yes, thank you.
Christian.
Hey, good afternoon, sir. Appreciate you taking time to come out and talk to us. My question for you is, with the U.S. entering an election cycle, and obviously our politics are always kind of wishy-washy, and especially the recent comments of the prior President Donald Trump, and it looking like he is leading Biden in polls, how does the U.S.'s kind of fickle stance with NATO right now affect the U.K.'s calculus on supporting Ukraine, even though other NATO members are kind of picking up their slack? For instance, Germany finally hitting their 2% mark for their defense spending.
Yeah, that's another very well-informed question. So well done. Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot going on in that question. Yeah, I think let me give you the bottom line up front. So the short answer is I think Britain's in a bit of a dilemma about the next election because on the one hand, it's always been a leading spender on military force. It's always been around the 2% mark. So it's always had a national policy of spending around 2% of GDP, even when it wasn't NATO policy, and it is NATO policy now. It's just that most members weren't meeting the policy. It was policy. It's just members weren't actually practically executing it. So Britain's always been a high military spender. It's always been highly involved in NATO, right? So one area of operations I haven't even mentioned was North Sea. So Britain takes the lead in the North Sea, and as you saw, it takes the lead in Estonia, it takes the lead in Romania, the Black Sea, and it's heavily involved in other areas, like Norway is another good example. So if the next administration, whether it's Biden or Trump, is undercommitted to NATO or is complaining about NATO members, on the one hand, Britain can say, well, that's not directed against us. We're all right, and that's good for Britain. It's good for global Britain, because global Britain wants to, and this is multi-party again. This is not peculiar to the Conservative Party. It's true of the Keir Starmer's Labour Party. The United States is what they want to align with, having given up the European Union, or at least the constraints of the European Union. It hasn't given up on the European Union. It still wants to be close to the European Union. It's just United States is its premier partner. So in one sense, if US presidents are pissed off with other continental European governments, then that's good for Britain, because it helps reinforce that bond. On the other hand, Britain does get scooped up in the blame, like particularly by somebody like Donald Trump, whose language is Europe. Europe is not cutting its. Europe is not. What's the phrase? It's not carrying its weight. And I totally sympathize. Trump is completely right on that. Britain excluded, and now Germany. European members of NATO have generally not been carrying their weight. That's entirely true. Trump is not wrong about that. I should mention the new members are going to be leading members. So Sweden, Finland, they're going to be leading members. They've already invested heavily in their own defense before they join NATO. They're going to be like heavyweight members in terms, they're going to have this ethos. We are invested. We're on the front line, particularly Finland. We're on the front line. They're going to have that ethos in the NATO Council, where they say, you other members, you have to step up, because we're carrying the risk. We're already investing heavily. You need to come and help us out. And that will help Britain, because they naturally align with Britain, as in they are very mindful of Russian aggression. They fear it's going to be them next. They have multi-party support for investing in defense and containing Russia. So they naturally align with Britain. So those new members are going to help Britain to anchor NATO in this more vigorous relationship against Russia. So in that sense, that helps. Even if you get a US administration that is very down on European contributions, and it should be, any administration should be down on a lot of these member countries. Britain, I think, can feel that NATO's moving in the right direction, and that it has friends and allies moving with it, at least heavyweight friends and allies. I hope that answers your question. Hit me back if you want to follow up.
Go ahead and let me know if anybody has a question. Bruce, can I go ahead and ask one?
Yeah.
Might have time for one. You made a couple of comments about China, and we've had earlier conversations about it, like the UK being a little bit maybe late and maybe even still incomplete about connecting from China. You had that Spectator article from 2021 implying a kind of a collusion, if Russia, China will take advantage. Well, so far they haven't. But could you give us a little bit of an update on the British perception of the Chinese danger, if I can call it that, or
yes,
what your calculation might be, especially as we were talking about before the show, the fact that the electoral equation has changed now with the re-election of the DPP, and she kind of stepping it up, doing the kind of reckless behavior or unacceptable behavior in the Taiwan Strait that the Russians were doing earlier in the channel.
Yeah. Great question, and we should do a lecture on this at another time because that's a
I
great
like that.
that's a good subject. No, the quick answer is Britain, amazingly, is highly engaged in Taiwanese security. That is very risky because, as I mentioned, the British Navy, the Royal Navy, is running with assets below requirements. The two big assets that were commissioned, the two big assets that it's committed to Asian security are Blair. Well, they delivered, but they weren't actually operational fully. They weren't declared fully operational until after Tony Blair. They were originally commissioned to help the European Union. Under Boris Johnson, at least, they've been pretty much dedicated to Asian security. Now, this is the risky part. There's only 2 aircraft carriers. You really need 3 to keep one on station in Asia. You need 3, right? One's coming home, one's getting ready to go, and one is on station. Only has 2. And these 2 have had a history of mechanical problems. Like one was supposed to leave port just yesterday or the day before, and its propeller shaft broke. And so one of those aircraft carriers in particular is just jinxed. It's had all sorts of problems, and it cuts down on its operational readiness. Now, so it's risky. Sending an aircraft carrier is risky when you've only got 2. What makes it even worse is Britain doesn't have the other surface vessels you need to really protect an aircraft carrier. It doesn't have the Aegis type cruisers to down incoming missiles and aircraft that would take out your aircraft carrier. It just doesn't have enough surface warships to send a battle group. Like the United States sends an aircraft carrier group. Britain can't do that. It just doesn't have the vessels. So it speaks to it's Britain's readiness or willingness, I should say, willingness to take risks with its inadequate forces on behalf of security all over the place, including Taiwan. So Britain is kind of leading out there because Boris Johnson made that commitment of aircraft carriers before the Biden administration did, right? So Biden administration has this policy of ambiguity, strategic ambiguity, which I don't like. And Britain does not have a policy of strategic ambiguity. It has no ambiguity at all. It's like we will defend Taiwan, and so should the rest of the West, because this is a defense of democracy and the security of commerce, maritime commerce, and all that. And we have to contain China. So you might think Britain investing so much in Ukrainian security, does it have the bandwidth to confront China too? Yes, it does. And you think about some similar historical reasons for that. So Britain, has a policy that has a history. It's anchored in its history of appeasing not just Nazi Germany, but Imperial Japan. And that was extremely costly. So Britain lost most of its Asian empire, and then it had to take it back. And that's just a very inefficient way of running your territories. So Britain is anchored in that. And again, you got multi-party support. Supporting Taiwan is a good thing. Again, it gets back to the economic viability of doing that with a military that is chronically underinvested and is going to take at least a decade to meet its requirements.
We've got to let you go, but if you don't mind, maybe one last question, because we are talking a little bit in our class about nuclear weapons. The word nuclear never came up in the conversation, and maybe that's a good sign. But whether it's the speculation about the nuclear ASAT that we mentioned, or whether you talking about how many ships you need or boats you need to have at least one of them on patrol. Have the British responded in any way, whether operationally or rhetorically, to these reckless threats by Putin to unleash a tactical nuclear weapon?
Yes. So rhetorically, yes. So Putin, I'm forgetting the month. I actually have a separate lecture up here, and I'm going to tell you the months when Putin was talking about if the West escalates, we're not going to take anything off the table, including nuclear weapons. So I'm just going to get the dates right here. So bear with me. Yeah, so Britain, actually my mouse is not working very well. Here we go. So Britain said these nuclear threats were unacceptable, and reiterated its own contribution to NATO's nuclear umbrella. So there are only 3 nuclear-armed members of NATO. That's France, Britain, and the United States. And just to be clear, Britain's capacity here, or capability, its capability is it has air-launched warheads, but its primary deterrent is nuclear submarine-launched ballistic missiles, Trident. And in theory, one of those Trident submarines is always on station. And Britain has reiterated that it's reiterated its nuclear deterrent, and supposedly has increased the operational tempo of its nuclear submarines. Officially, those operations are completely secret. Like, you're not supposed to know when the submarines leave base, or where they are in the world, when they leave, when they come back. But in practice, they all come out of one Scottish base, and journalists photograph them coming in and out. So the slide I found here is from is giving some quotes from October the 13th of 2022, where lots of European leaders were reacting to Putin's apparent nuclear threats. And one of the reactions comes from Ben Wallace. To remind you, you saw him earlier. He was the defense secretary. Quote, "Our view is if Russia were to use a nuclear weapon, there would be severe consequences for Russia. It would be breaking the 1945 taboo on the use of nuclear weapons." In diplomatic terms, that's as clear as you can get it. If you use nuclear weapons, we're going to retaliate with nuclear weapons.
Bruce, such a pleasure. And I've actually noted that you've kind of accepted an invitation for another talk. So I'm already looking forward to setting that up. Guys, could we give Dr. Newsome a round of applause? And Bruce, I'll let you get back to work. You look like you're actually at NORAD. I keep thinking, like, is he in Texas, or is he really like Cheyenne Mountain? But
my rib's not as big as NORAD, that's for sure.
Anyway, I'll be in touch with you. I can't thank you enough, as always.
You bet. It's a pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. Great questions. Love it. Well done, Randy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Bruce. Bye. Bye,
Thank
guys.
you. Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Randy.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.